Good morning and welcome to International Business Appreciation Month. This is the 13th year where we have brought together students, faculty, and staff from across the globe together to discuss the path to success for international business careers. I am Joan Phillips, Dean of the College of Business at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I am honored to be moderating the first event this month. This is the first of 8 IB appreciation events throughout the month of February. You can find the schedule and registration links at ib.umsl.edu. Before I introduce our 2 distinguished guests, I will go over some logistics for this morning's panel. This session is currently live on Zoom and Facebook and will be recorded for later publication. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. I will be monitoring these questions and will present them to our panelists after our interactive interview with them. Today, we have 2 panelists who are experts in international business from 2 perspectives, in front of the camera and behind the camera at 2 of the largest media organizations, CNBC and MSNBC. We have John Casey, President and Managing Director of CNBC International. John is responsible for managing and growing CNBC's assets in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Asia Pacific region. During his 27-year career at CNBC, John has led the teams in news and programming for CNBC International, Asia, and Europe. He spent most of his career behind the camera. We also have Ali Velshi. Ali Velshi is a journalist with MSNBC and the host of Velshi on MSNBC. Prior to joining MSNBC, Velshi hosted Real Money with Ali Velshi on Al Jazeera America. Born in Kenya and raised in Toronto, Mr. Velshi was an anchor and chief business correspondent at CNN and CNN International for 12 years. He has written 2 books on finance, holds a bachelor's degree in religion, and an honorary doctorate of laws from Queen's University in Canada, and teaches at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He has spent most of his career in front of the camera. Before I ask Ali our first question, we have a short video highlighting some of Ali's top stories.
I'm Ali Velshi, live outside the heavily fortified Capitol, the site of a tragic and mysterious collapse of a 12-story building.
This is ground zero of the series of tornadoes that hit.
We begin this morning with important breaking news on the fight against COVID-19. The first FDA-authorized COVID-19 vaccine is right now being loaded up.
Ali, or should I say ally, which is what I like to call you, because you continue to point out the reality of this pandemic.
Do you think the conviction of Derek Chauvin was justice?
I think justice would have been not seeing George Floyd murdered.
Step back, get back, get back, get back. Your head, he's head. All right, they are now moving toward us. They're now moving toward us.
Senator, good to see you. Is there work to be done on the part of Democrats to say, you're just talking nonsense? What's the biggest climate impact of the bill that passed overnight? What do you do about this persistent big lie that becomes a reality? It is time for the Republican Party to expunge these conspiracy theorists from their ranks, for the sake of democracy. To those of us privileged with a platform and a voice, it is not too much to ask that we do better with transgender and non-conforming people. Velshi starts now. I'm pumped. Oh, you're muted, Joe.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that was terrific. Well, welcome to both of you. Why don't we begin with the path that brought you to your current roles? As our students think about their future, it would be great to know what brought you to where you are in your career now. And Ali, we can start with you.
Yeah.
Millions of people watch you every day across the world talking about issues that impact international business. Tell us how, about your path to your role today.
It was a very crooked path. And I think that's important to understand, that when I started in this career, close to 30 years ago, there was no indication that it would be a crooked path. You would get in somewhere like I did. I got an internship at CBS News, and I got one at CNN. And ultimately, they led to my first jobs, although I went back to Toronto, where I was from, and I worked in local news, which I can't recommend enough for people who haven't done that. It was not the most enjoyable part of my career, but it really taught me about news that you have to scratch out, that actually depends on your interviews, your real life interviews with people and their views and things that you can't guess and things that you can't Google. I did that for a while, worked my way back to CNN, where I'd been a producer for some of my career, and I got on camera. It was terrible. I was terrible on camera. I can't imagine how bad it was. But this is in the days before YouTube and things like that, so none of you get to see it. But I do have some VHS tapes, and you will wonder to yourself when you watch them, how on earth did this guy get himself a job in front of the camera? But one day, I decided in the 90s that I'm so bad at this. I'm really so bad at this, I'm going to do something else, and I can find something else I'm going to do. And I called my boss and said I wanted to talk to him. I was going to resign, and it was going to be after my show because I had a morning show. So he said, yeah, come see me after the show. And I did the show, and I had been up all night thinking about how I'm going to quit and how liberating that was. And I did my entire show thinking I'm going to quit and how liberating that was going to be. And I go to see my boss, and he said, I don't know what you want to talk to me about, but that was the best show you've ever done. And then I dropped the idea of leaving the industry, and I continued. I realized that I've just been carrying the stress about performance and how it was going to go for so long that the minute I let go of that and just acted like me, things turned around and got a lot better. In 2001, I got a job with CNN. I was coming from Canada, and it was actually Friday, September 7th, 2001, I landed in New York. I'd gone around the world and taken this big trip. I moved all my stuff to New York for the job, and there was something wrong with my visa. And they said, it's nothing serious, but you need to go back to Canada for a few days. We'll sort it out on Monday. And Monday didn't happen, but they said it'll be done. And in the end, my visa came through on the morning of September 11th, 2001. But obviously, at that point, I had no way of getting to the United States. I'd sold my car. All the rental cars in Toronto were gone. There were no planes flying at all. So they faxed me my visa in one of those curly faxes, the kind we don't have anymore. And I got on a motorcycle, which is all I had left in Toronto, and I rode to Niagara Falls, where the guy in charge of the border had told the consulate that if he shows up before midnight, I'm on staff, I'll let him through. So on the night of September 12th, I got through the US border on a motorcycle with a curly visa, and spent the night there, and then drove to New York to start my job, and the rest is history.
What a remarkable story. Thank you. John, talk a little bit about your path to your current role as president of CNBC International.
Sure. So summer 94, I'm 19 years old. I wasn't a very good pupil, like hopefully most of the participants on this Zoom call. So I'd failed miserably at my A levels. I was studying in the UK. I wasn't doing very much, but I knew I had to do more than the screen print firm I was working in, which was making posters that went on the sides of buses. And I was processing those posters, feeling like I was wasting my life somewhat. And through various connections, I managed to get a dream interview with a new company that was launching that I was excited about. It was called European Business News, EBN. It later became CNBC Europe a few years later. And what their intention was to launch a business news network, which was a pan-regional TV footprint for Europe that talked about markets and business. And that just sounded like the best thing in the world to me at that point in my life. And so I like I say, I managed to get a conversation with the company. I went along. I met with the head of HR for an hour, and she told me all the things that I didn't have in terms of qualifications and what I needed to do to be relevant to work within the business. I then met with the head of technical operations for an hour, who was a really nice guy and did the same thing and told me what courses I should pursue, and he'd hire me in 3 years to work in sound or cameras or in the edit suites. And then I met with the person who I wanted to work for, a guy called Rob Bynan, who was going to be the head of news for this new network. He was previously the executive producer at Live at 5 at Sky News, and I knew everything he'd done in his career. And I was really motivated by his vision for what the network should be. And we ended up having a 5-minute conversation, and he drew 2 circles on a piece of paper in that conversation and said, that's a 12-hour grids, fill it with TV for this network we haven't launched yet. So having researched him and knowing what I thought the network should be, I filled it out with what I thought the programming grid should be. And he said, yep, that's pretty much what we're going to do. You're hired, and hired me on the spot. He hired me to be around because he had a good instinct about me. And basically for the first 6 months, I made cups of tea and printed scripts and got shouted at by anchors who weren't as nice as Ali. But I stuck around, and I had a very particular strategy. I was surrounded by mostly Europeans and some English young journalists who were all about 25. I'd just turned 20. They all spoke about 4 languages and were highly qualified and had degrees and masters. And I didn't have an A-level or a degree and spoke English badly. And I had a very deep insecurity about the landscape that I found myself in. And so I decided there and then I would outwork everybody. And I had another strategy as well, which is I would study what was really, really important to the big bosses and what was really, really horrible and hard. And I would triangulate those 2 things and become expert at them. So whether it was shortlisting huge tapes, or whether it was understanding why Belgian PPI made this particular asset class increase on the ticker, all the stuff that no one else wanted to do, but that seemingly was important, was what I made my business. And that seemed to work. So my career has kind of been in 3 chapters. The first chapter was 1994 to 2005, where I was an assistant producer, a producer. I'd run a website. I was basically working closely with content, closely with other journalists, and creating TV or digital content. The second phase was from 2006, when I moved to Singapore, to about a year and a half ago, where I was basically a manager of journalists. I was a deputy head, I was a head of news, I was a VP of news, an SVP of international news. There, my job was managing journalists, managing news, managing budgets, and effectively I was the asset manager for editorial resources and placing them in the right cities or the right platforms to cover the best stories, and making sure that we were pointing all of our guns at whatever the business news viewer wanted. And the last chapter still feels quite new, which is this job I've had for a year and a half, which is the president and managing director of CNBC International. And now my job is just to effectively run the overall business. So all of CNBC's assets outside of the US is my responsibility. So that's my journey.
You're still muted.
That's what a wonderful story. I was wondering, you both talked about having people who sort of recognized your talents and led you in that direction. Was there a moment or a situation, and John, I'll go to you, and then Alshi, where you said, okay, I've made the right choice in this career, as opposed to trying something new? When someone, first of all, what I'm asking is, somebody saw they believed in you. Was there a moment where you began to believe in yourself that said, yes, I've got the goods to be successful in this area?
I don't know if I have reached that point. I think it's important to have a certain degree of imposter syndrome perpetually. And that's what I think drives you on to work even harder and try and be that perfectionist that I am. So I'm not sure I fully believe in myself in the way that many of my mentors have over the years. In terms of what keeps me going, though, is I'm focused on the job at hand, not the job I want. And a lot of my mentors have always told me what's really important is to over-deliver in what you're doing, solve the problem before you, and then when the time that is right, the company or the organization will give you a new, even more complex problem to solve, aka a promotion. But focus on the job at hand and give that 110%. And so I've always been very engaged in my work. And where I got really lucky, I think, is when I started, it was all about live TV. The premise was to use this thing called television by sending this signal into space, into a satellite, distributing it to many, many people, and democratizing the information that previously had been in the hands of the few to the many through television. bit idealistic. I was 19 years old, but I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And so I was very, very motivated by the mission. And I was very motivated by the medium, because like many young people today, using social media, the instant gratification of live TV and seeing your work right there in front of you the minute that you do it really worked for me.
I don't want to like do the whole thing where it's I agree with John, but I really, really do agree with John on this sort of thing. I think there, particularly for those of us who are in front of the camera, the insecurity probably runs deeper. This idea that you're just endlessly looking for, affirmation from anyone around you. So it's been a life's work to find that affirmation more from within and from those people around you. And when I say those people around you, I mean mentors, right? I love mentorship as a formal thing today, which Yvette's played a big role for us at MSNBC and at NBC. But I've always had the informal mentors. So the signal you have to send to those around you is that I'm open to your helpful criticism. Hard to do when you've got big egos like a lot of us in this business do. Hard to send the signal that I am actually open to your tough criticism, because we're insecure in the first place. What we want is the affirmation. We want people to tell you you're doing a great job, you're amazing. There's never been anyone like you. But the truth is, all of us are pretty good, and with some improvement can be made better. That's a piece of personal growth. That openness to saying, I really am looking for a mentor, and I'm not looking for a mentor to complain about my day and my bosses and all that. I'm looking to figure out how I get better. To John's point, indispensable. Find skills that other people don't have, even within the same job. I probably came to the mission part of my journalism later. I liked doing what I did. I was very, very into the job. It was first as a general assignment reporter, then as a host of a show in business news, where I really threw myself into the material. Now I am really understanding the import of this profession we have chosen, the nobility of it. And I say that with modesty. I'm saying it's an important job. There are years gone past where a young journalist would come to me and say they wanted to be, an anchor or a TV star or something. And I'd explain to them that if you'd like to be a journalist, we can have that conversation. You're discussing manifestations of your journalism. But journalism really does mean bearing witness and holding power to account. And I'm in the world in which we exist now, which is so fraught, in which some people believe that the economy or our system of beliefs or democracy itself is imperiled. We now have really, really important jobs to do. So all of those years of skills building and determining things that you do that other people don't do, that make you valuable, that help you move up the chain. Now, John and I have a seat at that table, of that decision-making table. And it's important that we bring with us values that allow our newsrooms to evolve, to confront modern challenges, whether they're editorial or from a staffing perspective. So I'm very, very grateful that I leaned on people all the way along, and that I can fairly say that 30 years in, I'm an entirely different person than I was 30 years ago in terms of being better at understanding our newsrooms and understanding the mission ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's terrific. Let me build on that if I can. John, you mentioned that the people in front of the camera were yelling at you, and you got something wrong early in your career. And Ali, the pressure of being in front of the camera, and the show has to go on. So basically, what you're both doing is you work in such complex teams, and we know that team performance is enhanced by diversity of perspectives, skills, and expertise. So, what advice do you have for students to manage effective teams, knowing that sometimes people on the team are customer facing, what you might call line jobs, as opposed to staff jobs or back office operations? How do you all make it work together? And John, why don't you go first? Yeah.
The most important thing is a common mission. You need to understand why you are there and what you're there to do. And integrity, so that your teams trust you, believe in you, and galvanize around you. Cliche, but 2 + 2 does equal 5. And CNBC International is accustomed to being around very, very big opposition. When we're booking guests, when we're attending events, when we're fighting for advertising deals, when we're even fighting to be on the back of an airplane seat or in a hotel room, we're up against state actors who pour big budgets into their broadcast. We're up against billionaires. We're up against really stiff competition. And the way that we are number one in business and finance across the world is because we work very cohesively as a team with an unwavering commitment to the business news consumer, wherever they may be, however they may consume us. And we're very singular in that sense. It is complex, as you say, but I don't think it's as complex for CNBC and my team as it is for some other players, because if it's about economics, if it moves markets, if it's a piece of information that's in the public domain that needs to be further scrutinized, or even better, if it's a piece of information that's not in the public domain that's going to create price discovery, it's our mission above all else to deliver that. And so we're very clear on the mission, and people work and the teams coalesce around that raison d'etre. And then in terms of what I have experienced in my business with the people that I work for, the people I work with, and the people that work with me in my teams, is we're into long-term relationships. And I've got lots of colleagues I've worked with for decades. And I think the reason I stick around, and I think the reason that other people stick around, is they trust us. We don't ask them to do things that are inappropriate. We put the viewer first. We put diversity, equity, and inclusion first. We put the health and safety through COVID first. And we have to sometimes do things that make us uncomfortable, and we have to do sometimes things in the middle of the night, and we have to do sometimes things in a control room that might have a person that just contracted COVID. But we are putting health and safety first. We are putting integrity first. We will not do anything other than tell the truth when it comes to our journalism, because it is exactly what Ali says. It's an absolutely vital resource that populations, societies, and communities need right now. And I find that teams love that. We're a media company, we're a tech company, we're a news company, but tech companies can outbid journalist outfits at any point in terms of compensation and salary. So there's got to be something beyond that. And I think the mission that we have and the integrity of our people is that thing.
Yeah, I agree. I'd written down here that the intersection of business and journalism is in this particular spot, and that is your mission. You have to be aligned to your mission. Your team has to be aligned to your mission. Teams fail, whether it's in the journalism world or the business world, when the members of the team are not clear on what the mission actually is. The mission can't be putting on TV or putting on a TV show. It's got to be substantially clearer than that. It can be high-minded and noble. It can be get more viewers than anybody else in this particular demographic, but it has to actually be a mission. And the person in charge of it, or the people in charge of it, have got to embody that mission. They've got to really live it, because the actual work of putting TV together is grunt work in a lot of cases. It's difficult stuff that does not feel like you're actually changing the world in that moment. But if you have a mission as to how your little part in this, whether it's the graphic or the chyron that you're using or the lower thirds, how it affects the end product, and if the end product is strong and in the end product moves some needle, including your viewership numbers or your revenue numbers or the awards that you get or the audience that you build because of the quality of your work, that's what it looks like. And I think for managers, the issue is, how do you manage, which involves the resources part of the issue and the HR part of the issue, and the way you manage the people above you, and how do you manage the growth of the members of your team? They will enjoy the collective growth of what you do as you succeed and your team wins awards and things like that. But what about the individual growth? With this generation that's under 25, that individual growth is crucial. And they don't have an obvious path. It's not like when I was 23 or 24, I could imagine myself joining a company and staying with it for 20 or 24 years. That didn't happen, but I could at least imagine that happening. That's not easy for young recruits now. So they've got to think that working with you grows them as a person, as well as a journalist, as well as a member of a team. So I find that when I'm talking to managers or looking for managers, I'm looking for the people who can embody that. It's no longer keeping the trains running on time. That's now old fashioned. It's a given that your managers are going to have to do that part. But what else can you do to hold a workforce in a low unemployment environment where people are getting offers to go to other places, sometimes for very little more money because they are unsatisfied? You have to keep your people satisfied by giving them growth.
Mm-hmm. What terrific examples. You know, for both of you, one of the things that I was touched by as I was doing the research is what rich cultural and diverse backgrounds you both came from. So Ali, your background, you're born in Kenya, you're raised in Ontario, parents who are Indian, you've lived in South Africa and Kenya and educated in Canada, and now you're working in the US. How has all of that plurality of perspectives helped shape your worldview, both related to news, but also in terms of career and work?
Well, I'm very lucky to have all of those perspectives, although it's weird because when you think about why it happened with my grandparents or my great-grandparents moving from India to South Africa for a better life in 1893, and then my grandfather was Gandhi's youngest student, so my family was all involved in anti-apartheid stuff, in and out of jail and struggling through business, and then moving to Kenya for a better life, and that didn't work out, finally moving to Canada. None of it felt like it was part of a good plan to give little Ali Velshi a pluralistic upbringing. But it turns out to be that way. It turns out that that's actually a good thing, that I've seen so many ways of doing things. I've seen parents and grandparents in search of democracy, and all of a sudden I'm here in America, the modern birthplace of it. And lo and behold, it's having some struggles with democracy that I didn't know somewhere in my lizard brain I'm wired to deal with. As are many other people, as are descendants of people who were persecuted in Europe, Jews who were in the Holocaust, Black people who are descendants of enslaved people. We're hardwired to think about protecting democracy and dialogue and pluralism. So it's been very, very helpful to me in a way I never thought it would be. I assumed that my track was very generic journalisty. I had learned certain skills. I was going to execute those skills, and I've been doing that. And when I'm doing a show on stocks, it doesn't occur to anyone watching me that this is his contribution to building a better society. But I feel it now more than I ever have, because I see it in the entire context of my family's history and their struggles to look for free countries where freedom of speech was free, where involving yourself in politics did not come under the threat of arrest or detention. So that's why it's so important to me. As we see our society struggling right now, I see myself as a foot soldier in that effort, and that's partially just because of my history. That I am now 125 years into my family's struggle for finding a good place to live and be, and it's my job to keep it a good place.
Thanks, and John, your background also, yeah. Your father is Irish, your mom is from the Caribbean, and you were educated in the UK and Hong Kong. How have those experiences created opportunities or challenges for you in your international business career?
Like Ali, I'm very privileged. I would say it's opportunity, definitely not challenges, hardly any challenges. So I was born in South London. My mother is from Trinidad and Antigua. My father's from England and Ireland. So for the first 7-8 years of my life, I was in South London. I was around Black people or white people. Then I moved to Hong Kong because my dad got an opportunity to work over there in the early 80s. And then I was around either Chinese people or expat people, American, English, Australian, mostly Canadian as well. And then I moved back to the UK when I was 15, did miserably, as I've already explained, with my education. And then 4 years later, started working at CNBC, and then was in a very European, elite, you could say, metropolitan kind of an environment. I moved back to Asia in 2006 when I took on the job of running the Asian newsroom. Lived in Singapore for 4 years. Had a baby when we were out there with my wife, who's a Kiwi. So I spent a lot of time in New Zealand. Her stepfather's a Maori guy, very senior in the New Zealand Army, served in the Vietnam War. He had a very interesting background. I moved back to the UK in 2010, and I've been pinging around the world for the last 15 years, because on top of running CNBC Asia and CNBC Europe, I also look after our affiliates in Seoul, in Tokyo, in China, in Mumbai, in Johannesburg, in Lagos, various places. And so my job takes me around the world a lot. In my family, I have Jamaican family, I have Somali family, I've got Kiwi family. So I just lucked out, frankly. And I have had my horizons exploded and expanded at a very young age, and I have continued to do that through the luckiness of my international exposure. And I think that I'm very grateful for that. Nothing that I did, but my parents had a very deliberate and intentional view, which is we are citizens of the world. My father plays jazz guitar. He's a very gifted jazz guitarist, but that meant that he was in a lot of Black communities as a white person in London in the 70s and early 80s. And my mum is a very accomplished classical pianist, and she has always instilled a lot of different cultural values in me. And yeah, I think that I got a great hand in terms of diversity, and I've really benefited from that. And I think that having that perspective really helps you in terms of being a good journalist and thinking about different perspectives and trying to be inclusive in the way you tell stories.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. When we met a couple of weeks ago, John, you had mentioned the currency of being an American as a possible asset for U.S. students who want to pursue a career in international business. What does that mean, currency of being American, and how might students leverage that value that they bring to an IB career that they may not even be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So when you're making content, what you have to do is keep your audience front and center and never lose them. One of the ways that you lose an audience is through not having relevance or currency. What all of the students on this meeting have is a high level of relevance and currency, because they happen to be from the place that is the most known, the most understood, the most transparent, the most talked about place in the world, with the currency that underpins all of the world's assets, in the language that, along with Mandarin, is the dominant language of the world, and with the soft power of Hollywood that is appreciated and consumed around the world. And it gives you an instant relevance in any conversation, which makes you able to not lose your audience. And then from there, use whatever inherent strength or specialty or superpower you have to add value or to keep them engaged in whatever you want to talk about or whatever your specialism is. So I think that the advantage that you have as an American is almost anywhere you're relevant. You won't necessarily always be loved wherever you go, but you'll at least be understood and acknowledged and relevant to the conversation. So that's all I really meant. But I do think it's a real inherent starting point that means you can always get into any circumstance, situation, or opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. And Ali, you do some teaching over at the Wharton School. And so I'm curious as to your understanding of business students. What are American business students who are so well trained in business, but what do they may not understand about the world that they might need to know to help them in pursuing some of their business, international business careers?
Well, I'm very lucky in that about half of my students, 40% or more of my students, are either international students or American students of an international background. So we end up having these classes they're like a mini United Nations, which is terrific. The American students are very anxious to get exposure to languages and cultures around the world, because other than the hard skills that you need in a business school to get employed, that the employers are always talking to us about, the coding, the engineering, the finance, the accounting skills, things like that. Other than those, the number one non-hard skill that every employer is looking for is international experience or the ability to understand other cultures or languages or things like that. So for the American students, that exposure, just as far as it's in their class, is amazing, but they're all looking to do a semester abroad or work somewhere or work for a company that will take them around the world. That's a sort of a very exciting thing for many of my students. On the other side, the non-American students, and I think John's point here is amazing. It doesn't matter where you go in America. You can find a list of places where they say that Americans are hated and everybody hates America. And you go around, everybody Everybody's got a view on America, but everybody wants an American around and everybody wants some help from an American. They might want an American on their team. It is just not a disadvantage in the world to be an American, despite the reputational ebbs and flows of being American. Certainly in the last few years in Europe with NATO countries, there was complaint about whether America is all in on that kind of stuff. There are probably issues about that right now as it relates to Eastern Europe or the Middle East. But the bottom line is, folks do enjoy the way Americans live, enjoy how Americans think, enjoy the freedom of expression that America has. Even these debates that we're having recently, they're intriguing. You'd be wrong to bet against America. We're at a perilous time, but we will probably get this right because we've gotten other things right. So the idea of embodying an American ethos is not a bad thing in this world. It's only beneficial. Companies that are global in nature will appreciate you for it. Companies that are American who understand that, on average, more than half your revenue comes from places outside America will appreciate that. International companies will appreciate that. So I think that it's great to keep one eye on what kind of global experience you can get during your education. But it's also good to remember that you've got one of the best assets in the world, and that is an American education and exposure to being an American.
Terrific. So here's a sort of a more difficult question, which is, given the current political situation, increasing tensions between Russia and Ukraine, the changing landscape of Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan, the partisan political climate here in the US and in other countries as well, what gives you the most optimism about the future? John?
The seriousness with which all communities, including the investing community, are taking climate change, and for the most part, the determined stamina that organizations, a lot of organizations, not all, have taken towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in the wake of George Floyd being killed on the 25th of May, 2020. And the fact that I'm a father of a 1-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they, bring optimism and joy and hope to my life on a daily basis. There is a lot to be anxious about or be pessimistic about, but there's nothing you can really do with pessimism or negativity other than bad moral negativity. But there's a lot that you can do with optimism and positivity. So I try and focus on keeping the glass half full as opposed to empty. I don't always succeed, but I do for the most part, I'd like to think. But I think that, you could have, people have views on what happened in Glasgow last November at COP26, and some people have skepticism over, as I said, the concerted efforts to try and redress a lot of the imbalances that exist during this important month in America. And I think those things give me genuine hope, despite a lot of the negative things that you cited.
Mm-hmm.
John gives me hope for saying all that, because, sometimes the world that I'm in makes it feel like there's zero progress on any of these fronts, particularly the really important ones, right? Climate is one of these ones that you can't just keep on pushing back year after year. Diversity initiatives, as logical and sophisticated as they are in, let's say, companies like ours, they struggle out there in the world. They not only struggle, but they come up against backlash. And so we are trying to figure out how we embody a world in which democracy, pluralism, justice, and equality is the touchstone. It's actually what we do. And I worry that we're not very close to that right now. So, I think it's upon us, those of us who are out there in the world, whether we're in the world of business or the world of journalism, to try and weave that into what we do. I will agree with John that the only thing that gives me great hope is young people. I do worry about whether people of our generation can figure out what BS on the internet is and how to not fall down those dumb rabbit holes, of misinformation. But I'm hoping that our younger generations are more critical and they're more digital savvy, and they're able to sort of not be manipulated and find information from various sources. So I'm not without hope, but our own generation, my own generation, does frustrate me a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one of the real joys
present company not included.
Yeah, okay. And one of the real joys of being in education with young people. I want to turn to some of the students' questions, but before we do, let's lighten it up a little bit. You both travel the world for work. What's your favorite place that you've ever visited? Ali?
That's a great question. It's the best part of my job, right? I travel around the world and the country on someone else's dime. I will say, I mean, look, I've traveled to beautiful places, and if you ask me about beautiful places that I've been, I'm going to talk about Shanghai or Hong Kong, where I used to go a lot, or Istanbul. But in fact, what I've been doing in the last couple of years, as we've been dealing with this issue of polarization in America, is I've gone through America. And I have gone to places that typically are not on your way to something, smaller communities, places in which, we do well with an urban audience. And these are places that are as far from urban America as you can get. And, realizing that people's fears and aspirations in a place that's 25 miles from me, I'm in Philadelphia right now, are as foreign as they might be if I were visiting Vietnam or China. We don't all share the same worldview. So I have taken to enjoying these opportunities that MSNBC gives me to travel around the country and speak with small groups of people who our bookers curate, regular people. They're not there because of any position they hold. They are members of the community, sometimes specifically with opposing views, and being involved in those discussions. So my travel's gone from being about a place that I want to be in or an event that I want to cover into places where I can have conversations with people who do not share my lived experience and who can inform me, and hence I can inform my viewers about them. So it may not be a very a compact answer to that one, but it's gone from places, and I've traveled pretty much everywhere in the United States and most places in the world, and I love traveling. And if I'm looking for a vacation, I know exactly where I'd be going, but this is what's become interesting to me, traveling in this country to little places I've never been to find out what Americans are actually worrying about.
Mm-hmm. John?
I love a place called Waiheke Island in Auckland, New Zealand. My wife's from New Zealand, so we go there quite often. I love Angkor Wat in Cambodia. That's just a really special, unique place. Very relevant to journalists as well. There's an island in Indonesia called Nicoya Island, which is a very special place for me. So those are my sort of three favorite places to go. But in terms of travel, I mean, I travel a lot, but I don't really focus on the place that I'm going. I'm focused on connecting to the people that I'm visiting and trying to have some first-hand front row seat understanding of what Ali was talking about and knowing what makes them tick, understanding what makes them fearful, understanding what the opportunities are, and trying to get some authentic insight into what makes them tick. And I think that informs my storytelling and my decision-making as it pertains to my business, whether that was my old one of running newsrooms or my new one of running the overall P&L. And I think that everyone is the same, but everyone's going through different things. And there's a lot of different pressures around the world, around America, around the United Kingdom, through what we just went through in terms of leaving the European Union. There are metropolitan bubbles that exist, and a lot of people in those metropolitan bubbles are out of touch with the rest of their country, even though they think they know better. And I think the more that you can travel your country and the world, the better we are.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so a real quick lightning round. Coffee or tea, Ali?
Coffee.
Okay, John, favorite takeout order?
Crispy duck.
Okay, great. Ali, Olympics or Super Bowl?
Olympics by a margin.
Okay, and then John, Rams, Bengals, or not my type of football?
Not my type of football, but definitely the Bengals, based on the conversation I just had with my boss, who loves Cincinnati. Okay, terrific. Well, let's turn this to, we've got some wonderful students and some great questions here. And we have a question from Ellie asking, how do you find good mentors? And should we try to have multiple mentors? Definitely have multiple mentors if you have the opportunity. Go quality over quantity, having said that, because there's no point being trapped in a conversation with someone that's not adding a lot of value where you're going to feel awkward about ending the relationship. So focus on getting the right ones. But in terms of plurality, which has been mentioned a couple of times, no one has all of the answers. There is no silver bullet. And you will learn different things from different people, and they'll be relevant in different circumstances. So I think in terms of wisdom, there is no exclusivity. You want to be able to just pick from everybody, learn from everybody, and then find yourself and do it your way, and pick a route that's applicable to your true character. In terms of finding them, I mean, if you're lucky enough to be in a formal program, that's always good. I'm a mentor in multiple formal settings through the London Screen Academy, which is a free school here in the UK that I'm a trustee of, through the Black Employee Network, NBC Universal, which I'm an executive sponsor of, and through the Amos Bursary, which is a charity I work with here in the UK that's focused on working with young Black men and young Black women from African and Caribbean descent, and trying to just make sure they achieve all they can achieve. And in all three of those instances, there's very formal screening, applications, safeguarding, protocols around meeting. So if you can get into one of those, and there's probably a lot more of those sorts of programs that maybe you're aware of that are out there, just requires a bit of tenacity and research. That's an excellent route. Aside from that, I think, once you get into the workplace, just speak to your HR department. Most good organizations will have programs, and if you put your hand up and ask, and it's the first rule of journalism, knock on the front door. If you ask the HR professionals, this is my skill set, this is my experience, this is what I want to do in my career, I'd be really grateful if you could partner me with a senior executive within the business that could be my mentor, and just say it. Normally when you say it, people, more often than not, will help you out. So there are programs to appeal to in an organization. Go to the HR department and request it, or look around and see if there are any official programs. Unofficially, if there's smart, wise people around, ask for their advice, and definitely have more than one.
Okay, thank you. Ali, Shreya wants to know how you have managed stress of tight deadlines.
It's a good question. I don't know that I have real advice on this one, because it's been with me all my life, and I'm not sure I manage it all that well. But they are all tight deadlines. You surround yourself with a team of people who take deadlines responsibly, as you do, so that you're never managing each other's management of deadlines. If you're a journalist, it's something you just have to accept. There are going to be deadlines. My personality is such that I do better with deadlines than without. Things without deadlines don't necessarily get done as quickly, or get done at the last minute. So constantly moving deadlines is probably good for my stress level. I will say this: stress is a killer if handled badly. You have to decide to own it. You have to decide you are in this business. It ebbs and flows in terms of its intensity. Figure out what you have to do, whether you have to run or how you eat. My issue with stress is I eat too much, and I eat the wrong things, and then I feel self-loathing and horrible. Figure out what it is you need to do to be kind to yourself, but understand that you're getting into an industry that carries stress associated with deadlines. If you can't do that, and you will know this not too far into your career, do yourself a favor and do something else. Because I have met a few mid-career individuals who have had to just make that decision later in life because they realized they never were able to adapt to it. They were never able to change. And that's totally fine, because I think normal humans are not looking for this degree of stress in their daily lives. It takes a certain sort that feeds off of the stress that this industry provides. Make sure you're good with that, and you've got some mechanisms for letting that stress off or for managing it. If you can't do it, don't make life miserable for yourself. Realize that you can apply the skills that you've learned, whether they're business skills or writing skills or production skills, somewhere that is not in the news business, because the news business is stressful. If it's not stressful, you're basically not doing it right.
Okay, and you can both take this one, but John, it's your turn. The question is, as people of color, do you feel that your existence and successful background or knowledge sometimes still do not measure up for you to be noticed at work? And if so, how do you tackle that problem? And do you think finding mentors can help navigate the minefield as well?
on the latter point, a good mentor, depending on what it is that you need, can always be helpful with any circumstance, challenge, or problem or obstacle, and this is one of them. So absolutely, because a good mentor will give you some advice on that. In terms of me, yeah, I'm in multiple professional settings where I sometimes get ignored or I sometimes aren't acknowledged. And in most cases, when I turn up in whatever city as the head of news or the president, when they meet me, they're occasionally taken aback and didn't expect me to look like this. Mm-hmm. But what I choose to do is not let it bother me and let the work speak for itself. And I don't have much of an ego. I can get offended. I don't like that my color is sometimes an ingredient in how I'm perceived or not perceived. But at the end of the day, the way I was raised is to focus on embarrassing them with your success if you face that circumstance, and focus on getting the job done. So yes, a mentor can help you navigate that, find coping mechanisms, find ways around it. I sometimes don't get noticed. That hasn't ever happened within my organization. My organization is a meritocracy. I haven't suffered from any issues because of my color within CNBC, and I've been at CNBC since 1994. So it's not been a problem within my organization, but it can happen obviously in the professional settings, but you just have to decide how you're going to deal with it. And the way I deal with it is I just move on and focus on the job at hand. Mm-hmm.
Ali, do you want to address that as well?
It's just to say that there's a space that I think we all want to live in, which is somewhere between nobody noticing your color and doing anything differently about it, and somebody noticing what you may bring to the discussion by virtue of your color, your language, your ethnicity, and your background, right? Because we want diversity because we actually want people's input that they may have on the basis of their perspective that the larger group may not have. And I think we have trouble finding that difference, finding that space. I virtually meet no one who has this complaint who says, I don't want anyone to understand that I am of a different color and or a different ethnicity or a different background, and that may inform the way I think about editorial things, or the way I think about business, or the way I think about interacting with people. And I think that's the magic, right? Trying to figure out where we are in the middle. I'm like John. I don't let it bother me too much, but I don't think we've fully mastered that yet. Once we've mastered that, the idea that, wow, we have diverse teams all across our companies, and we get the most out of that. So it's more than 2 + 2 = 5. It's that you're getting stories, you're getting ideas, you're getting criticism, you're getting pushback that in a perfectly good way that you never got before because certain people weren't even at the table. And I think that's where we can do better. In our companies where we do really well, these are the places that we can do better, to say, what's the best way you get something out of John or out of Ali by virtue of recognizing what their experience and the diversity they bring to the table is, and ignoring anything else that isn't relevant to that conversation. That's hard. That's probably more art than science, but I think that's what we're working toward, and that's what success would look like.
Okay, terrific, thanks. And John, the next question I think is good for you and your time as maybe even as a producer, but can you describe a time when you pitched a unique story?
Okay, one that comes to mind actually was more in a sort of editing capacity with a great journalist that worked for me in Tokyo called Karin Joji, who pitched the idea of my first ever long form documentary. And I was in the business of live TV and keeping Squawkbox and Market Watch on the road and focus on the live wheel. And this was an idea that was going to require a big budget, which I didn't really have. And I was new in role as a head of news. It was 2008, I think. And she pitched me this idea for a show called Wheels of Change that was to talk about this new wave of what was going to happen in the automobile industry of electric cars. And she was going to need to go to the Honda factory and go to the States from Tokyo and interview this guy called Elon, who I'd never heard of, and spend money that I didn't want to spend on this long form show talking about electric vehicles. And because it was my first one, because I did green light it, it was a little bit scary spending that amount of money at that time and so new into my role. I was all over it. So I was the producer, I was the editor, I was looking at the rushes, I was working closely with Carrie on this project. And it turned into a really good show. And I got to look at Elon Musk 15 years ago firsthand through pouring through all of the rushes and hearing about his ideas of what he was going to do with his PayPal money to build this business. And it was really, really exciting. And I think what the lesson from that commissioning was the journalist presented the opportunity, the access to the newsmakers that would make it come to life. And she really, really felt passionately that she needed long form, not a 3-minute slot on Squawk Box, but a 30-minute long form documentary to unpack this industry, this titan of an industry, the car industry, and identify something that she thought was going to be new information in the public domain, told over long form 30-minute on CNBC, and to unpack electric cars. And she was based in Tokyo, so a lot of the major automakers, traditional automakers, were based there. And that was just a really good process. It ended up being a really good show, but I think just the ingredients of what she brought to the table and how she articulated it gave me a lot of confidence over pursuing that story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, terrific. And Ali, we have a question for you about an uncooperative interviewer. Can you explain a time when you how you've worked with an uncooperative interviewee?
Yeah, it happens a lot more than it used to, actually. I mean, generally speaking, you're interviewing someone knowing what you're going to get out of the interview. The only time in the old days when you'd get an uncooperative interview is when it was interviews with people on the street, people you were just looking to get an opinion from. Now it's in the realm of politicians whom we interview, where they'll say something, typically it'll be incorrect. My business background, even though I don't do as much business as I used to, means that I'm usually armed with the data and the graphics to make the point about what is correct. And I'll correct the person on air. And in the old days, correcting somebody or showing that somebody was not telling the truth on TV would have led to either a conversation with them afterwards or a clarification that they put out or a call from their PR people. Now it's weird. Now you prove people wrong and they tell you you're lying. And before you're finished with the interview, it's posted to their own website to demonstrate how they rode the bull, as it were. They were able to, stay alive for a 5-minute interview with a lamestream media, anchor. It's weird. It's weird. So now you're conscious of not being punked, right? You're conscious about not booking people who are simply going to lie in bad faith. Because while fact checking is an inherent part of our job, in the last 5 years, it became the first thing that we did in our job. And it's exhausting. It's a really interesting anti-journalistic, anti-democratic trick, right? If you just endlessly throw out lies and occupy your journalists with checking lies, they don't do other things. The enterprise journalism doesn't get done. The stories, people said to me, what was the toughest part of the last 5 years? I said, all the stories you didn't know. Why you didn't know Afghanistan was about to fall. Why you don't know why the same thing that was happening in Russia in 2014 with Ukraine is happening today. Why you don't know what's happening in Western China or in Taiwan or what has happened in Hong Kong. That's the problem, that when you flood the zone with nonsense, it takes you out of covering important things. So uncooperative interviews mean something completely new now. What am I getting out of it? If I know it's going to be uncooperative, if this person has a history of lying, the conversation becomes like a debating society competition where you're constantly catching me. You can't even finish a sentence because you're back and forth with them about the frequency and velocity of lies. The danger is that I've stopped doing some of that. I've realized someone's just going to come on and gaslight, and that's not necessarily worth it for my audience or for me. And so then they're out of the dialogue. And you can see that if you do this enough times over and over again, everybody is now in separate dialogues, and we've now lost the ability to talk to each other entirely. So I really struggle with this one. I really, really struggle with how to make this work, how to get people of different political ideologies and beliefs to subscribe to the idea that we live in a pluralistic society. You do not tolerate other people's views. You embrace the idea that people have views that are not your own and figure out a way to move forward on that. And I'm not sure I think we have enough of a crisis of citizenship that I'm not sure everyone is bought into that whole idea. So the concept of the uncooperative interview has taken on new life and needs to be solved.
Mhm. Okay, both, we have a questions that's similar from both Angela and Lindsay. And John, you can take this verse, and Ali, you can weigh in if you like after. What does a normal work week look like for each of you? And are you often working around the clock, or do you make some work-life balance time for your family? How do you do that?
It's different from week to week, and it's been very different for the last 2 years since we got. Oh, sorry. Am I on mute?
No, you're fine.
Okay, great. So it's been very different for the last 2 years, for the many decades before that. I think for the most part, it starts, luckily my son quite likes CNBC. So in the morning before school, he watches it with me on CNBC Pro. At my desk, whether it's here or in central London, I'm at home right now, but I also have been going into the office at around 8. It's very Asia heavy in the morning. It's very UK heavy lunchtime, early afternoon. It's very US heavy at the end of the day. I get away from my desk between 4:30 and 7, depending on meetings for the most part. And then probably once a week, I'll have a very late meeting with the States. Once I'm away from my desktop computer, I use my laptop to consume legal documents in the evening once the kids are asleep, and catch up on the news, because I don't really get to consume a lot of news. I don't need to as much as I used to in obviously my old role in this role, but I don't get much of a chance other than CNBC on mute on my TV. So then I consume the news in the evening, normally through CNBC.com and a few other sources. And then the weekends, I'll do 3, 4, 5 work things in terms of focusing and concentrating on responding to an email or reviewing a document, and then no more than 1 or 2 calls if there's something important happening on a Sunday in Abu Dhabi or the Dubai office, because it's a work day, or if there's something that was important happening early Asia time, so I can deal with it late London Sunday time. And yeah, I think I have a decent amount of balance. My wife works. She runs a media company. Also, she works at the Financial Times, and we're both pretty busy. And we've got 2 kids, as mentioned. But I think we also have a balance. I think once Omicron's passed fully, which it's in the process of doing, I hope, I'll be back on the road. And then when I'm away from the family, I have much more intense hours, because it doesn't really matter when there aren't children there. I can just work, and that's fine. So yeah, I mean, no complaints. It's a pretty, Ali's job, my job, they're intense jobs. You work a lot, and you can't really switch off, because ever since the global financial crisis, the world business news went from being a 5-day-a-week job to a 7-day-a-week job, because you have to beat that, New Zealand, Australian, Japan market open on a Sunday, and that requires XYZ to happen. And so the world doesn't really switch off, and that is going to be a problem. But I carve a little bit of me and my family's time out for all of that noise.
Mm-hmm. And Ali, why don't you build on that, but also talk about how you stay organized and how you prioritize at work?
So I just want to pick up on that point, John. When I started in business news, I started in Canada. We were emulating a CNBC type channel in Toronto. And back then, Canadian stocks traded on Canadian markets. There were about 80 stocks that were cross-listed, which meant they were on the US market as well as the Canadian market, but it was not a particularly international thing, investing. There was a stock market, there was a boom of retail investors in the 90s, but mostly Canadians could invest a very small portion of their investments elsewhere. So I was not a business journalist. I was a general assignment journalist, and they were looking for business journalists who were typically sort of old guys who worked in local news, who had been doing it for 50 or 60 years. And they just needed a bunch of new people. And I said, I don't really understand this very well. I don't think I do very well. They said, look, we'll give you a really good producer, and mostly just listen to him, and we'll put an earpiece in, and he'll actually give you the questions that you're supposed to ask. And the selling point was that it's business. It's 9 to 4. Like, you're not going to ever have to work weekends and nights. And as a junior general assignment reporter, I said, sign me up. Little did I know what John knows now fully, that being a business and economics reporter is a global, full-time, never stops job. And the recession in 2008, the financial crisis, underscored that, but that's completely true. And it expands to my sphere of journalism as well. The current schedule I have is unusually heavy. I work 10 days on. In other words, I'm on TV for 10 days. I'm off for 2 generally, and then I have 2 days of prep to work up to the shows. My typical shows are Friday night, Saturday morning, and Sunday morning, but lately we've had a lot of staff churn, so I'm doing a lot of prime time. So for instance, yesterday and today should be my days off, but yesterday I learned that I was hosting a show at 11 p.m. last night. So tends to work that way. The good news is that I can go into the studio at 30 Rock, or I have home studios here in Philadelphia where my wife and I spend time, and in my apartment in New York City. So when I found out yesterday that I was going to do TV, didn't matter. I'm in my home in Philadelphia. I could do it from my home here. Then I get called out to do live breaking news, natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, that kind of thing. And I travel for my own show, The Conversations that I was telling you that I have with Americans on a scheduled basis. So in and amongst all that, there's generally travel. So I have a packed suitcase in both New York and Philadelphia, ready to go, to the extent that my wife could just FedEx it to me if I wasn't even able to get home. I have I have 3 hurricane bags, one in Philadelphia, one in New York, and one in my office. So my assistant can get it to me if I need to, because I'm always headed to a hurricane when I didn't expect to be. And now, sadly, in the last few years, I also have a civil unrest bag, which has a helmet. It's got a flak jacket, and it's got a gas mask that is set up so that I can broadcast through it. The mic connects to the actual mask, so you don't sound like Darth Vader. And I keep myself organized just by sort of always knowing where I am and where I'm ready to go to. I follow the news. I can usually tell before I'm going to get the call from MSNBC that I might be deployed somewhere, just by the nature of the story. I know the kind of story that they're going to need me on. So it's very, very exciting. Nothing like being back in your own house, in your own bed. The endless travel and rental cars and hotels are not nearly as exciting as everybody thinks. It's fun to travel on your boss's dime, but being home is still the most exciting thing I do these days.
Mm-hmm. Then the next question, and I'll address it to both of you, but Ali, why don't you take it first? And I'm going to combine them because they're really asking about the state of journalism today. And when you talked about your travel bags, just how dangerous it can be to be trying to seek truth in very tumultuous times. So part of this is, how do you take care of yourself? Is there a mantra that you repeat to yourself to remind you of to motivate you, or is there some type of a story or experience that you remind yourself as to why you're in the game? And maybe this relates back to the mission you talked about, but how do you personally handle each of these difficult situations that you're out reporting on? Ali.
Well, they all differ. Some of them are just unadulterated sad, right? I was in Kentucky a few weeks ago for the tornadoes. There was nothing to be done about that. It is just the saddest thing in the world. You're watching people come back to their home for the first time after their homes have been destroyed. And I will say, when people ask me what my favorite interviews are, they're never the names you think they are. They're always the people who come back to their home for the first time after a natural disaster or some tragedy has hit them, because it is in that moment that you see the raw strength of the human spirit, right? In the tornado in Kentucky a few weeks ago, I saw people literally coming back to their houses and picking up one little piece of wood and putting it, on the front to be cleared up, and then finding some piece of art that was in the house and putting it aside, because that's how they will fix it. They will come back to life by doing one thing at a time. I find that those are the hardest ones for me. I cover a lot of school shootings. I covered the building that collapsed in Florida. Those are very, very hard. Those are the kind that need real sort of psychological help. And you rely on friends and family to get you through some of those things. And you really, as a journalist, have to be very, very conscious of that. And I think for the younger generation who become journalists, they are even a more sentient, empathetic group of people. So you have to be very conscious of how this is affecting you as a person. On the other hand, the mantra is that we are here to bear witness and to hold power to account. So you have to think about it as a mission. You have to think when you're out there, there's actually a role. Just like a firefighter has a role in fighting a fire, you have a role as a journalist in shining a light on a situation, showing the world that it is happening. That's fully half your job. Just show them, even if there's no commentary. Just show them that something is happening. And then take the voice that you have as a journalist, the authority and the access that you have as a journalist, and find where power resides and hold power to account. And that looks different for every story, but it is the mantra. And if you can continue to do that, it gives you a sense of purpose that allows you to push through in those tough times where it seems like this is not important. And remember that in this age of challenge to democracy, suddenly everything's important. Right? School board meetings are that used to be very frustrating as a local news reporter to go to these school board meetings. It seemed a little boring from time to time. They're apparently not boring anymore. Community board meetings, city council meetings, all of a sudden, this is where democracy is going to prevail. So the idea that you are covering that means that you not only have a front seat, but you have a Theodore Roosevelt style spot in the actual arena where things are going on. So I think that's the thing that should power you through the tough times.
John?
Yeah, I think the reality and the things that I do at CNBC is slightly different to what Ali does at MSNBC and NBC News, and so I don't have that same perspective in terms of human stories or natural disaster stories that Ali has. But at CNBC, what we focus on is the truth, and what we focus on is the facts, and what we focus on is being unbiased. Where our principal mechanism that we convey on CNBC is the market, and the market is the single best mechanism for figuring out what everything means. And at the end of digesting the information that is out there, the market will spit out a price. To create a price, you need someone on both sides of the trade, someone that's buying it and someone that's selling it. And then the market will determine what that price should be, whether it be how we feel about Tesla stock or whether it be how we feel about Evergrande and the Chinese economy and the risk of contagion from a real estate market that's being challenged. And so what's the most important thing for us is to tell the truth and to just focus on delivering that information. And in terms of the challenges around the industry, particularly around disinformation and fake news, our North Star is being transparent with the audience about what we know, what we don't know, and presenting the facts as we see them, and then analyzing it to the extent that we have the skill set to do that. And the market demands that of us, and the market requires you to be transparent about the information that you have, and then conveying it in the most effective way possible. In terms of mantra, my mantra is don't outsmart them, outwork them.
Oh, that's terrific. The next question I have is, what is the instructions that your editors, from your editors, on how to report on the voting rights crisis currently going on in the US today? I guess, Ali, that would be for you.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I was looking at it earlier. Funny enough, it is probably the most of what I do in my work right now. Interestingly enough, there's no editorial guidance or leadership on that one. This is one in which everybody has come to this story themselves. The journalists of MSNBC, we're a loose federation of states, right? The shows sort of do what they do. Some of our shows are designed to be news coverage shows, and some of them are meant to be perspective or opinion shows. Mine is a perspective and opinion show, but I do work in news coverage. And those of us on the perspective side have sort of arrived at various points on the same area of the spectrum, and that is that we are in a world in which democracy is imperiled, and it is imperiled through 1,000 cuts, right? There's this idea that it's binary. As long as there's a vote, you're in a democracy. But in fact, there are lots of countries that exist right now that have the vote in which there is no meaningful democracy. The vote is the last part of democracy. So we don't have editorial direction about it. What we have is editorial discussions about it, in that we will have people brought in, experts, secretaries of state, people who are legal experts on voting, democracy, voting rights, gerrymandering, redistricting, things like that. So that we have a support network where NBC will provide us with joint resources so that the average journalist can get up to speed on some of these issues if they don't otherwise know them, and we read everything on it. But it's not a mission, which is interesting. And that's just sort of the nature of how we work. We don't work, our job is to tell, analyze, and contextualize news and current affairs as they're going on. So generally speaking, everybody comes to this. There's probably no articulated mission from the bosses because there's no need for one. Everybody is taking these handful of major issues, political issues that we face right now, and running with them on their own. The only conversation would ever be if somebody's not doing it, and we're all doing it. So the expectation is there that we're doing it. So we don't have editorial guidance on it. We have editorial help and resources in telling the story.
Okay. Well, we're almost at, we're at 12:15 right now. And I'm just, what's one piece of advice as we wrap up that you could offer a 20-something year old moving into international business to wrap up? John, why don't you go ahead? Yes.
Use social media as a utility. Don't get hooked into the endless scroll and lose your life in that world. It's very addictive. The instant gratification that you get from it is a bad habit. I get that it's a tool and I get that it's required and I get that it's used for all sorts of things, but think of it as a utility, not as something to while the minutes away with. It's one thing I would tell and do tell 23-year-olds frequently. In terms of, from an international perspective, it's curiosity, empathy, leave your ego at the door. Don't assume your way or the American way is the right way. Don't be ashamed of it either, but just be curious and be humble as you engage in different cultures and different peoples. And I think you'll do just great.
Okay.
Nothing to add to that, but I feel very seen by his social media comments. I'm twice the age of the 23-year-olds, but you're absolutely right about that. Use it as a tool. It can be very helpful, but the rest of the time, it's a time suck cesspool. So be careful.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to share your paths, your viewpoints, and your advice with our global student audience. This is a fantastic way to start a month of International Business Appreciation and Black History Month, and we are so honored to have had you as part of our panel. As I mentioned, this is the first of 8 events for this month. Next on the list is former U.S. Ambassador of Ireland, Mr. Kevin O'Malley, who will share his perspectives on international business. That event will be both in person here and live on the UMSL campus, and as well as on Zoom. It will start on Friday, February 4th at 11 a.m. And please check out ib.umsl.edu for the full schedule to register. And Ali and John, thank you so much for an incredibly inspiring panel and all of your advice.
Thanks to everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.